quarterback. Let's look at the rankings now and count them down. Capital One is presenting the rankings tonight. And into the rankings at number 25, undefeated Liberty, perhaps having a look at that highest-ranked Group of 5 champion as you look at Clemson also back in the mix.
Yeah, and Tulane's sitting at number 23. They have UTSA this week, which is also undefeated. So they got a tough schedule moving ahead. When you talk about Liberty sitting right there, they're in striking position.
Well, a couple big things in this takeaway, too, though. NC State in the rankings, that helps out Louisville, which could in turn help out Florida State. Clemson back in the rankings. That helps Florida State. That's a win for Florida State on the road. Tennessee in the rankings, too, helping the SEC teams as well. And no Utah. We've now removed Oregon's best win from the top 25.
And just to clarify, too, when Joey mentioned UTSA, they are undefeated in conference play in the American. They have lost non-conference games. Tulane also with only a loss to Ole Miss. Let's look at the next group. At number 20, Oklahoma State, a couple bad losses on the resume, but still with a great chance to get into the Big 12 championship game. Kansas State still alive there. Iowa, without that offense, though, is up there. They're in the Big 10 championship game.
No doubt. And you look at an Iowa team that beat Illinois. No matter how you look at it, it wasn't pretty, but they just find a way to continue winning football games. And just maybe they may shock the world in the Big 10 championship game.
Kirk?
Yeah, I'm looking at this slate. It's not so much about the resume of the teams up in the top 4 or 5. It's the accomplishments of what these teams have done, and the success that these guys have enjoyed. A bit off the radar, teams like Kansas State, see Oklahoma State able to get a win and climb back up. Notre Dame potentially finishing at 9-3. All these teams having great years.
Yeah, K-State, Oklahoma State, as I mentioned, they still have a chance to win the conference. They have to have things fall right on the final weekend of the season to get into that conference championship game. Oklahoma State just needs to win, and they're in. Let's look at the next group. At number 15, Arizona's climb continues. Now, Arizona also can win the Pac-12, and here is how. If Oregon falls to Oregon State and Arizona wins the Territorial Cup against a really struggling Arizona State team, then it would be the Wildcats that would make it into the Pac-12 title.
And look at LSU sitting there at number 14, and we've had this discussion. Florida State beat LSU, and we talked resume. Who's your best wins? When you look at LSU, they're probably the best 3-loss team in the country. Where does the committee see the win that Florida State has against an LSU team that was early in the season when the AP had LSU inside the top 5?
And I'm looking at this schedule, too. I'm trying to figure out the justification for dropping Oregon State 5 spots. I mean, I look at all these teams that have slid up. Oregon State sitting there sitting through 11 games at 8-3 with some pretty decent wins at their disposal, and yet they free fall. Whereas a team like Tennessee gets absolutely boat raced in 2 consecutive weeks and they drop 3 spots. So I'm trying to figure out the justification for the significant drop for the Beavers and not the Volunteers.
I hear what you're saying, but some of those teams they might think are just better.
Sure.
Arizona beat them.
Arizona beat them.
So, I mean, I think that's fair, too. So, Kirk's clapping. So,
I let the committee, whatever, man. They figured it out. They got Oregon State at 16, and we're on to the next panel. This will be a great panel, by the way, next year when we're trying to figure out who's at 12, 13, 14, and 15. That'll be a lot of fun.
Well, let me ask both of you guys this real quick. We got an hour show tonight. You want Oregon State higher? Who do you rank them ahead of there? I'd probably have them ahead of Oklahoma out of that group.
Yeah, I think you could justify Oklahoma for sure. I think you could justify with how LSU's playing on defense. I think you could justify them in front of LSU, and Arizona has the head-to-head. You got to acknowledge the head-to-head, which we've talked about forever.
Definitely agree with that.
Where would you put them, Kirk? If you're upset about them being 16, where would you put Oregon State?
I like Oregon State. I just called their game last week. They're a good football team, well coached. I'd have no problem putting them anywhere really on this panel. You could put them ahead of Ole Miss, ahead of Oklahoma. I'm not here to stand on a soapbox about Oregon State. I think they're a good football team.
I just love the fact that we haven't even gotten to the top 10 and McElroy is already fired up. That's the part I love.
Tennessee gets absolutely drubbed in 2 consecutive weeks. They drop 3 spots. It's hard to understand.
Yeah. Let's get to number 10. At number 10 is Louisville. Louisville has the game against Kentucky this weekend. They're in the ACC championship game where they will meet Florida State.
And I thought it was an impressive win. Jack Plummer, to me, he's kind of been the weak link, but he showed down against Miami, back and forth in that game. He was able to make some plays, going for over 300 yards. I just love his performance down the stretch in the clutch.
Number 9. Missouri Tigers, Eli Drinkwitz, they pulled one out of the fire against Florida, and now they have a chance to finish with 10 wins.
Yeah, and it's been a great year for Eli Drinkwitz. I mean, just a remarkable, remarkable achievement to have this team on the verge of 10-win season. But I thought there might be a case to be made for Louisville to be ahead of them this week. NC State jumped in the rankings. Is another good win for Louisville. So I thought maybe they would jump Missouri, but with them still staying at 10, Missouri at 9, feels like Louisville has nowhere to go.
What about number 8? If they beat Florida State, they'll have someplace to go. And so this is into the status quo portion of the rankings. Alabama number 8, as they have been in every set of rankings since Halloween night.
Yeah, we expect to see them at number 8, and they are part of a great scenario that could play out moving forward. It's great to see them at number 8, because at this stage, everybody else ahead of them, this is when the argument starts to begin. These teams from 8 up to 1, if we have some things fall correctly, we should have some fun on December 4th.
Well, we're going to lay out one of those scenarios for you fellas a little bit later on. Look at number 7. And like Alabama at 8, Texas Kirk has been number 7 in every ranking, just holding steady.
Yep, that win obviously in Tuscaloosa has that's kind of their trump card over Alabama. I think what this tells you is that the committee really respects what's happening above these teams, because normally you would think that Nick Saban and Alabama would get the benefit of the doubt, but Texas is kind of that roadblock for them. And of course, Oregon continues to not just win, but dominate people every week they play.
I think also coming into play is the SEC's lack of typical performance in the non-conference schedule. I mean, they have a losing record against the ACC.
Yeah.
There are a few more of those games coming up this week. So I think they've treated the SEC basically the way it's played.
Yeah.
This year for the most part. We're going to do this a little differently tonight. Look at number 6. The Oregon Ducks still sitting there. Only loss on the resume by a field goal in Seattle. And if they can beat Oregon State this weekend, they will get another shot at Washington.
And you can make an argument that they're playing some of the best football in the country. Bo Nix playing at a Heisman Trophy level, the way they run the football with Bucky Irving. I just love the physicality on defense, offensive line. Oregon, to me, is a team nobody wants to play right now.
They have an amazing resume. Not at all. Amazing eye test.
Yes.
If we're looking at that.
Yes.
I think if you look at their efficiency numbers, both offensively and defense, but they're off the charts good. I think they are as complete as you'll find and as dangerous as you'll find in the entire sport. But the resume is terrible. They did not have a win against a team that's currently in the top 25. Utah was that win. They were 22 last week. They're now out. They're 7-4. Their next best win is against SC, who's 7-5. Capped off their season in the loss last week. So I'm trying to figure out a little bit with Oregon. I think that they are deserving of the 6th spot. They are the 6th best team in my eyes as well. But the resume doesn't really substantiate that, so they're kind of hanging there just by a thread on the high test.
And I think that's what we have to be careful. You can only play who's on the schedule and how they look and how they dominate and the way they control those games. So I get you when it comes to the resume. This is not a beauty pageant. This is football. We actually go out there and hit people in the mouth, and we got to give Oregon credit for doing that and at the veracity in which they do that.
Yeah.
They've played great, Kirk. Is there any inkling that I left that game in Seattle thinking that maybe Oregon was a little more complete than Washington, but they lost the game. So, I mean, I think they're ranked appropriately at the moment.
You could make an argument that they've been the most consistent team from the beginning of the year all the way up to this point. Is offense, defense, every aspect that we've watched them play. Last week, what was it? At halftime. I mean, it's like they scored every possession. Bo Nix. And again, you can look at their opponent and say, look who they're playing. Or you can look at it and say, wow, Bo Nix is a veteran quarterback. He's been through every aspect this sport has to offer, the good and the bad. So you got a veteran leading the way. You got speed all over the field. You got Dan Lanning coaching that defense with Tosh. They fly around. They're playing with confidence. It'll eventually play itself out. They go to Oregon State this week. More than likely get a rematch with Washington and Las Vegas. You win those 2 games, Oregon is going to be in the playoff, and they deserve to be exactly where they are, in my opinion.
Oregon missed Arizona on the schedule. SC not being as good as hoped has certainly hurt their resume as well. Let's go to the top of the rankings, and we expect to see the number 1 team in the land to once again be the 2-time reigning national champion Georgia Bulldogs. At number 1, it is indeed Georgia.
Yeah, there was no doubt that it was going to be Georgia. Now, I've had them ranked number 1 the entire season, but these last few weeks and what they've been able to do, Greg mentioned what they just did against Tennessee, Missouri before that. They have put their stamp on being number 1 right now.
Is there separation?
There is separation.
Georgia and the rest of the
field.
field.
What they've been able to do, the way Carson Beck is playing,
That's it,
and
right
the way he played without Brock Bowers, I think he grew up, and now Brock Bowers is back. They're the number 1 team.
I mean, this team at 100%, fully healthy, we've seen it, for a half against Ole Miss, and they are unstoppable. So it's unbelievable.
Number 2. So Ohio State, undefeated, going into Ann Arbor this week. The win on the road against Notre Dame, which sort of to what Joey brings up a lot. What's the win like at the time? Notre Dame didn't play as well later, but in the moment, big road win, beating Penn State. Now the real test and the ultimate one for the Buckeyes comes Saturday against the team that we assume will be at number 3. Michigan Wolverines, so 11-0 and 11-0, and once again undefeated, 2-3 going at each other Saturday, Kirk.
Yeah, that's what, if you're a fan of that rivalry or a fan of the sport, you love to see Ohio State, Michigan, Alabama, Auburn with everything on the line in that last game, and you'll get that in Ann Arbor on Saturday. Of course, all the talk about Michigan having to rally around Jim Harbaugh being suspended these last 3 games. It adds to the drama, of course, of the game, but it doesn't need anything. Look what's at stake. 11-0 and 11-0, and winner take all, advance to the Big Ten championship and more than likely into the playoff.
This is a really unusual year because of the number of undefeated teams that we have left. More undefeated teams than playoff spots at the moment. Kirk alluded to Ohio State, Michigan will take care of itself on Saturday. Florida State and Washington are the 2 remaining teams. In terms of strength of record, Washington has the number 1 strength of record in the country. But Florida State's number 4. That is a measure of how a potential playoff team would fare against the schedule according to the metrics. Now the Seminoles without Jordan Travis holds all kinds of records for them. He was their leader and their quarterback. Did it cost Florida State the 4 spot this week? Who's number 4? It did.
Yeah.
So Washington, after the road win in Corvallis, slips up a spot to number 4, and that leaves Florida State at number 5. Now, the Seminoles have Florida coming this weekend. They've got an ACC championship game against Louisville. Mike Norvell, the head coach of the Seminoles, will join us a little bit later on College Football Playoff Top 25. So Washington moving ahead of Florida State. Kirk, what's your reaction to that?
What we said in the open, the comment, I think, and we'll have to ask Boo what he thinks, but I think it has more to do with what Washington has accomplished, the totality of the season, than it's a reflection of questioning Jordan Travis. I go back to the 2014 season, the inaugural year of the playoff, and Ohio State losing J.T. Barrett. He was very much like Jordan Travis. He was their guy. He was the straw that mixed the drink for that Ohio State team. You take him out of the Ohio State-Michigan game, everybody thought they were done. Nobody knew what Cardale Jones would do against Wisconsin. I think it was 59-0, and it was enough for the committee to move them ahead of Baylor and TCU into the playoff based on that evaluation. And I think the committee will look at Florida State in the same way, see how they do in the upcoming games that they have this week against Florida and then in Louisville in the ACC championship. But we'll hear what Boo says, but I think it has everything to do with respecting what Kalen DeBoer and the Washington Huskies have accomplished in an entire season.
And I completely agree with you. And if I'm Florida State, guys, I feel really good because I only dropped 1 spot. And I didn't drop because my quarterback got hurt. I dropped because Washington went on the road in the Corvallis. They beat a really good football team, a team that they were the underdog against, and that only moved them up 1 spot. But if I'm Florida State, yes, we lost our leader in Jordan Travis, but I have to have ultimate faith in Tate Rodemaker. I got 2 great wide receivers on the outside. We can run the football. That defense is still there. And I'm looking at only moving 1 spot down. If we go on the road and beat Florida in a rivalry game, and we beat Louisville in the ACC title game, only moving 1 spot, the reason I feel so good, I think that'll put me back up 2 plays 3. There's going to be another spot open. And so if I'm Florida State, I feel really, really good tonight.
Give me something. Everybody sing.